You need boundaries so you can see the boundary breakers before they break your stride. See, ain't nothing going to break my stride unless I let it. There's nothing that's going to slow me down unless I give into it. You need boundaries. And today on Growing Hope, we're talking about the boundary breakers, and then we're going to come up with ways that we can deal with them so they don't break our stride.
It's time for Growing Hope, the show determined to grow up hearts open to pursue the extraordinary. Because you are extraordinary! And now, it's your host, Kathryn Lang.
Hello, and welcome to Growing Hope with Kathryn Lang. I am Kathryn Lang. I am a hopesmith and a dream igniter and just a little bit of a snarky rainbow. I am here daring you to live out all of your possibilities, all of your extraordinariness, all of your uniqueness. I share words of hope and encouragement and possibility, and every time I get to share, it ignites me because I am called to lift up, cheer up, and stir up. And anytime I get a chance to do that, I get excited. I get so excited. We are all called to live in purpose and on purpose. And when we step into that purpose, when we step into our unique design, then we step into the abundant life. And when we step into that abundant life, we are exceedingly overflowing with everything that we need, everything that we want. It's beyond anything we can think or imagine. How does that sound? Would that not be awesome? So what keeps us from living that exceeding abundant life? For me, it's been some boundary breakers. People who have slipped right through my fences, my defenses, my expectations, and they have released the squirrels I spent the last week trying to wrangle. All of a sudden, I have a bunch of raving squirrels with pixie sticks running the show, and I'm trying to get them back in and get them back wrangled, and I'm frustrated and I'm exhausted, and I'm beginning to wonder if it's even worth it. Not because I lost my focus. Not even because I changed my intention or my direction, but all because somebody, a boundary breaker, broke my stride. Do you have boundary breakers in your life? When my boys were younger, I would tell anyone that watched over him what the boundaries were. These are the rules. These are the expectations. Now, I knew that there was going to be some give and take because each and every person has their own way of looking at things, and that's okay as long as they adhere to the hard, stops, those hard boundaries that I had. I believed that the people I put my children in the care of, including their dad, would do what was in those hard lines. I believed it. It wasn't really true. See, my youngest came home from an outing with his brothers and his dad, and all of a sudden, he was telling these wild tales about what they had done. And his older brother kind of reached over and put his hand over his little brother's mouth and stage whispered, "What happens at Uncle's stays at Uncle's." Turns out, just because I set the boundaries doesn't mean that everyone else followed them, especially not the dad. But we still need boundaries. And the thing is, I can't set your boundaries, but I can set my boundaries. And I can tell you that in my life, this is where the buck stops. This is where no one gets through. This is what you can't do in my life and to me. And when I set those boundary lines and I set those expectations, then I set up alarm systems that allow me to know when the boundary breakers show up and sometimes when boundary benders show up. You know, the boundary benders, those are the ones that just keep pushing the line until they get what they want, or they keep pushing the line until they expand the boundary. Have you ever encountered a boundary pusher, a boundary bender in your life? I was a boundary bender. I was an expert boundary bender. I knew where the consequences were. I knew where it was going to get bad. And I would stop the situation. I would stop pushing before I got to the consequences. So I didn't encounter a lot of consequences, which meant I just kept pushing the boundaries and kept pushing the boundaries. I would ease up to the line and I would nudge it a little bit. And then later on, I'd ease up to the line and I would nudge it a little bit. And it became like my ponytail holders. Every time I use a ponytail holder, it expands a little bit. And so the next time, until eventually I have to throw it away. Well, in my case, or I break it. That's always an option. And sometimes in my cases, I just kept pushing the boundary line until I expanded the area that it entailed. Rinse, repeat. For most of my life, I was very good at bending boundaries, so I would recognize a boundary bender when I encountered one. Just like my youngest son, huge boundary bender, but he wants to grow and expand. He wants to become more. He wants to test himself and challenge himself. My mother was a boundary breaker, and I didn't even realize it until the first time I said no to her. I had a really good friend that was a boundary breaker, and I didn't realize it until I said no. And I had a client I was dealing with that was a boundary breaker. I didn't realize it until I said no. Because when you say no to a boundary breaker, they don't take it well. A boundary bender, on the other hand, because they are trying to grow and expand, a boundary bender will listen to no a little bit better than a boundary breaker. A boundary breaker takes it personal. So the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize the difference between boundary breakers and boundary benders so that we can recognize them and see them when they're coming. The second thing we need to do is we need to to recognize that there are consequences for breaking boundaries. And there's not just consequences for the ones who break the boundaries, but there are going to be consequences that snap back on us. There just are. Because boundary breakers don't take no well. The third thing is that we need to limit our interactions with repeat offenders. People that we have recognized as boundary breakers and that they don't really care that we know they're boundary breakers. And they don't really care that we have boundaries. Those are the people we need to try to limit our time around. The fourth thing is that we need to practice saying no and meaning it. And not with an excuse, not with an explanation, just let your no be no. And finally, we have to check our boundaries regularly and make sure that we haven't pushed or allowed someone to push our boundaries beyond where we wanted them, or we haven't had them broken and not even realized it. And now our squirrels are out running around, all willy-nilly. My dad used to tell a story about the young lady who had a boundary. She had a line and she didn't cross it. She said, I'll never cross that line. I'll never cross that line. And she would walk up to the line, but she wouldn't cross it. And she might walk up to it and touch it, but she wouldn't cross it. And she might dance just to the edge of it, but she wouldn't cross it. Until one day she looked around and she couldn't find the line. And she looked behind her. And she had crossed the line without even recognizing it. That's why we have to review our boundaries so that we know, did we cross the line? When the boys were younger, we lived on 40 acres and I wanted them out. I wanted them growing and adventuring and testing. But I also set boundaries for their protection. No crossing the pavement or running water without an adult. I wanted them to have the freedom to test themselves. Now, I have since learned that my boundary bender took those as suggestions, and he found his loopholes and his way around it. And he suffered some consequences a time or two because of it. But he was testing his boundaries. And the thing is that I can have boundaries that involve you, but I can't dictate your boundaries. And the only thing I can stop is you crossing my boundaries. I have to trust that when it comes to your journey, you get to define your journey. I get to define mine. Boundary breakers want to define my journey. And that's who I'm watching out for. I'm watching out for the people who are trying to take what I've said no to and change it. If I tell you I can't, then I can't. And I'm not going to allow you to manipulate me into saying yes. I mentioned I had a friend who I didn't realize she was a boundary breaker until I said no. She would come up and she would offer you something really nice. And then that same day or maybe a couple of days later, she would come back and she would ask for, she would have a request. She did not indicate that the nice thing she did was connected to the request. But the first time I said yes, I felt a little bit of the strings. The second time I said yes, I felt those strings tighten. The third time, so on and so forth, until I felt tangled in her strings. So the next time she asked, I said no. I could feel her stare. And I'm pretty sure the rest of the room went completely silent because nobody told her no. Nobody that was alive anyway. But I said no. And I meant no. She didn't talk to me for 3 years. But when she did talk to me again, there were no strings at all. See, my son was a boundary bender in order to grow and expand his journey. My friend was a boundary breaker determined to get you to do things her way, the way she wanted. Sometimes I think boundary breakers break boundaries just to see if they can. Sometimes I think they do it as a way of holding on to control. But by recognizing the difference between a boundary breaker and a boundary bender, you can know how to stand your ground. Boundary breakers have to know that when you say no, when you put that boundary in place, there's consequences for breaking it. But you have to recognize that the consequences may also affect you. This is the hardest thing for a lot of parents because they put boundaries in place for their kids and the kids break them and the parents don't want to suffer. If you ground your child, you ground yourself because you're limited now in what you can and can't do. My mom was a boundary breaker. And when I began to really recognize it as she got older and sicker. Looking back, I wonder if maybe part of it, she was trying to control her circumstances that she couldn't control by being a boundary breaker. But I would tell her, this is the way it is. This is the thing I'm doing. And the Tuesday before she passed away, I was running errands in town and I had all the kids with me. And I was like, okay, we're going to stop by Nana's and we're going to visit with her and then we'll get lunch and go home. Because I was stopping to get the kids lunch, I volunteered to stop and get my mom lunch. Well, what she wanted me to do was to go into town, back into town, and go into a building and go into a cafe in that building and get her a particular meal that they only served on Tuesdays. But I had planned my entire trip, my entire errands around a schedule. And I explained that to her. I said, look, I will go to any restaurant with a drive-thru and I will get you any meal from any restaurant with a drive-thru. Nope. She wanted what she wanted. She didn't really care that I had a schedule. Now, maybe under different circumstances, I would have let her push that boundary, but I had all the kids with me. It would have meant unloading and reloading and the whole kit and caboodle, and I just wasn't up to it that day. And I said, I will do anything other than this. And she said, no, I don't want anything from you. She tried to force me through that, no, I don't want anything. She huffed and she puffed and she got mad. She wanted it her way or it wasn't going to be okay. That's what boundary breakers do. They huff and they puff and they're going to be mad. And I was okay with her being mad with me because I knew that all the things, all the concessions that I was offering made the boundary okay. When you're dealing with boundary breakers that look at your concessions as pointless and worthless, you know that they're trying to break your boundary. They're not trying to get along. So the second thing is there's going to be consequences, and you have to recognize that sometimes those consequences are against you as much as they are against the boundary breakers. The third thing you need to do or to recognize is that boundary breakers, especially repeat offenders, just limit your exposure with them. You may not be able to block them out of your life completely, but you can recognize that this is their goal. Their goal is to break your boundaries. Their goal is to push you and to harass you until you give in to what they want. And when you know that, when you have those alarm systems up, then you can recognize it. But Lord help you, if you give in that one time, they're not going to stop. See, I imagine the snake in the Garden of Eden as that very first boundary breaker. He's like, hey, nice lady, how about you come over here and have a bite of this here fruit? It was just a little bit. It was just one little bit bite. See, that's all that boundary breakers need is just a little bit. Because if you give into them just a little bit, if you go beyond that boundary that you set, and even after you tried to make concessions over here, if you go beyond that, then, all bets are off. You may not be able to completely break your exposure to your boundary breakers, but when they start pushing and they start demanding and they start ignoring your concessions, hey, exit stage left. If they're going to be mad, they're going to be mad. The fourth thing about boundary breakers is to recognize that no is a full sentence. You can tell them no. I've been working with our son on this because when I invite him to go do something with us, he will hem and haw. And sometimes he'll make an excuse. And I have reminded him that it's okay to say no. See, that is his boundary. He gets to dictate it. No is him dictating it. I do not want to do this. I did this the other day with my husband. He invited me to go dancing. I really wanted to go dancing, just not that night. So I said, no tonight. Let's plan for next week. The more you practice saying no in these simple circumstances, the easier it becomes to say no when you come up against a boundary breaker. Practice saying no and just letting your no sit there. If you practice saying no, it becomes comfortable to you. If you don't practice it, it's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be hard to say. Trust me on this. Just let your no be no. And finally, make sure you're checking your boundaries on a regular basis. If you're worried about not knowing your boundaries, write them down. The boundary breakers are experts at getting you to forget your boundaries. And they're very subtle about sometimes breaking those boundaries. So you need to be checking your boundaries and shoring them up and make sure that you remind yourself it's okay to have these boundaries, even if it makes that other person angry, even if it goes against what that other person wants. These are your boundaries, your expectations, your limits. We all need boundaries for our journey because it helps us stay in our lane and it keeps us focused on Jesus. Each boundary line guides us to our unique design. And that's worth holding on to. Thank you so much for investing with me today for Growing Hope. We are all in today on being our uniqueness and living our unique design and doing all that we are called to do. Connect with me at growinghoperadio.com or kathrynlang.com. Or you can join me for the Abundant Life at abundantlifeprogram.com. You are unique in all the world. And when you lean into it, you live your abundant life. Until next time, please remember, be blessed. And in all that you're doing, find a way to be invested in others, to be relentlessly helpful, to have fun and make friends, and to enjoy this journey, and to be a blessing to those that you encounter.
Thank you for joining us for Growing Hope with Kathryn Lang, where we are sharing hope, encouragement, and inspiration to do more. Visit www.kathrynlang.com to invite Kathryn to be part of your event or to share your own stories of possibility living. Until next time, remember that a seed of hope planted and nurtured will grow up into a world of possibilities.